my primary goal is to really create something for my heritage or for my culture, because I believe being underrepresented, there's still a lot of cultivating, a lot of groundwork, a lot of sowing that we need to do right now, to get Filipino cuisine, on people's top of mind.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Owning your own cafe or restaurant is a dream for many people, not only in the industry, but outside it too. There have been many stories of some that have left their chosen vocation and put everything on the line to fulfill their dreams. Some have failed, some have succeeded. Many, though, have been able to make a greater connection to food, their heritage and community, and it's enhanced and broadened Australia's culinary persona. Will Mahusay is the founder of Sydney Cebu Lechon. Will, how are you going?
Hello, Huck. I'm very well. Thank you for having me here.
Well, we're stoked to have you on the show. I'm really interested to find out more about Filipino cuisine. It's not something that we know a lot about in Australia, but you actually left the corporate world 5 years ago to dive deep into having your own restaurant. But what led to that decision?
Well, having spent almost 2 decades in corporate, I did take a gap year. I think it was 2015 from memory. And after how many months of sort of just time for myself, I then went on to think, oh, where do I want to go from here? And it so happens that at that time, my dad was actually looking to, like not throwing the towel, but like retire. Um, Retire because of his age, and he's not able to, his body is not as strong as he once was, because he's of age now. And um and he said, look, if I stop everything that I'm doing, there's gonna be a lot of people that's gonna miss uh the delicacy that I've been serving since 1991. So would you consider, or have a think about taking take just taking over, and have some sort of continuity? And after how many weeks, like literally weeks of thinking about it, I decided to take a punt, and I delved into it, and then so here we are.
Well, you mentioned 1991 when your father started. Can you take us back there and how he started cooking, what he was doing?
Oh, good question. 1991, I was probably year 8 or year 9. So I gotta say that you know, I wasn't interested about starting up the charcoal, starting putting on the pig on there and cooking it. I was more interested in just going out and playing basketball with my friends, and after high school, and yeah. But so 1987, this is how it started. 1987, my family, my parents, we left Cebu, the island of Cebu in the Philippines, and we moved to Sydney, Australia. And then basically, after how many years of my parents, feeling that they felt a bit homesick. So they thought their way to ease that feeling of homesickness was sort of to cook a delicacy that's known, um, about their city that they grew up in, which is Cebu, and that's obviously Cebu Lechon. So it was their way to ease that feeling of homesickness, and then out of that, people started, can you do it for us? Can you bring it to our next party? Can we buy it off you? And it became so popular that he started sort of catering on the side for close friends and relatives and family. And then before you know it, like how many years later, in 1991, he established his sort of catering business, and that's when Cebu Lechon started officially. And back then, it was, the name was Fred and Feli Mahusay Cebu Lechon, and it was only in the last 5 or 6 years that I sort of changed it and put a rebranding, and it's now known as Sydney Cebu Lechon. And 1991, 30 years now, we've been roasting free range pork, and the recipe, the flavor, everything has remained the same as it was back then to now. And the reason why we know that, because we have regulars that my um, that people have been buying from my parents, from decades ago, and they would come back to me and say, "Look, you probably don't remember me, but I'm a friend of your parents, and always purchased it on Christmas, and every year the flavor has remained the same. That's why we come back to you." So yeah.
You mentioned that you came over here in 1987 from the Filipino island of Cebu. And Philippines is actually thousands of islands, and the cuisine is not very well known in Australia. Can you tell us a bit about Filipino cuisine, and particularly also the island that you're from?
Well, Cebu is what we call the Queen City of the South. It's in the central region of the Philippines. So, Philippines being made up of well over 7,100 islands. Obviously, Cebu is the second biggest sort of city. Number one, obviously, being Manila, and Cebu is the home of Cebu Lechon, and it's basically Cebu Lechon is you know a spit roast where there's a lot of stuffings in there, such as your lemongrass. Every family has their own recipe, but we add things like different aromatics such as star anise, bay leaves, lemongrass, shallots, a lot of pepper, obviously salt, and other secret ingredients that each family will put in, and that's charcoal roasted over how many hours. But the magic is in the brining. So obviously, when you stuff it and you sew up the stomach, you just don't put it on the charcoal roaster. You sort of there's a brining process that we like to do at least half a day, if not the full day. Yeah, yeah, that's right. Because you want to let the flavors, the internal marinade, sort of infused with the actual meat itself. That when it's cooked, and you got to try this for yourself, and you got to come to the restaurant, and I'll sort of demonstrate what I mean, and that you can really taste the flavor in each and every bite, from the crackling golden skin all the way to the meat itself. Even without tasting it, you just sort of take a whiff. You could already smell the flavor. Like, it's sort of soaked in the aroma. You can't escape the aroma, pretty much. So Cebu Lechon is that's Anthony Bourdain, when he traveled to Cebu, um, we were like over the moon when he announced to the world that it's the best pig he's ever tasted. And I'm like, that's like a privilege, and that's an honor for people like me that are based out of Cebu. And of all, because there's different lechon in the Philippines. You've got lechon in Manila, you've got lechon in other places of the Philippines in the south, but Cebu lechon itself is probably the most iconic roast pork in the whole country. And also lechon is a Spanish word for suckling pig. To those that don't know that, but the way Cebuanos, the people of Cebu, the way they did it, we've just sort of elevated it because we've stuffed it with all of these aromatics, where it just doesn't smell good, but the flavor it's like a punch in the mouth, like an umami bomb. Yeah.
It's also known for the amazing glassy sort of crackling that you get. What's the secret to getting that?
Well, definitely you gotta, the part of the brining process is that, the skin, you allow the skin, of course, to dry out. And once that's dried out, everyone knows the technique where you sort of pierce the skin. We don't score it the way you would normally score the skin. There's a tool that's used in a lot of restaurants, especially. You can see these tool. You can see this tool in Chinese restaurants where they sort of stab the skin, make little tiny holes. That's obviously one of the main things that we do to make sure that it does come out crispy. And you paint it with a bit of oil, and with enough charcoal, with enough heat, and with enough temperature control. Then you get that sort of golden crackling, where every bite of the skin, it's biting into potato crisp, like that just crispy. I mean, if we chop it all up and get little shards, you could probably bag it up and then call it like, yeah, pork crackling skin instead of. So yeah, it is really intense, like a good intense of flavor.
There are a lot of people from the Philippines in Australia, but we don't see a lot of the cuisine. Can you tell us a bit about the culture and community of Filipinos?
Definitely. So we do feel, I personally feel that Filipino cuisine is somewhat underrepresented. That's probably the term to be. And the reason why I believe it is underrepresented is that when my when my the older generations, like my parents and my grandparents, when they came here, most of them came here with, I suppose, um, with already an experience in either a professional sort of environment job, like office environment, or whether they've already held positions as warehouse managers in the Philippines. So, and when they came here, I suppose that's what they knew. So that's what they got into in terms of, most of them went into the office work, most of them went into warehouse work, for example. So it was somewhat for them, it was a stable sort of employment, and they sort of felt that going into a restaurant or a food business was a little bit too risky. So they took that route of, let's play it safe. And fair enough. And, that's what they did to sort of give the younger generation like myself sort of a head start. And I suppose the younger generations are more now in a position of um, not privilege, but I suppose more of a position where they can take risks, because I suppose if all things fail, we can always turn back to go back to our parents. Whereas my parents, if imagine if they started a restaurant and if it didn't work out, they probably wouldn't have that much of a support behind them. And so the younger generations like myself are now sort of building up that courage to be more entrepreneurial, and that's why in the last 5 or 8 years you're seeing more and more Filipino eateries or cafes or restaurants or even catering businesses starting to pop up, whereas 15 years, 20, 30, 40 years ago, it's extremely rare. There might be, back 20 or 30 years ago, there might only have been maybe, I don't know, 5 Filipino restaurants, if that even, all around Sydney. Whereas now it's probably quadruple that, at least. And I guess it's got to do with the risk that we are now able to take. Whereas back then, 30 years ago, the risk was too high. So that's the reason why none of them really had that courage to put up a restaurant or a cafe. Um, yeah, as such, yeah.
There are many restaurateurs that'll tell you it's a risk to open a restaurant, no matter your background with the low margins. What's it been like coming from the corporate world and leaving that behind and entering the world of hospitality and running a restaurant?
I do miss the corporate world because I mean what I miss is my colleagues, my people that you work with, that I've worked with. Not so much the targets, uh, not so much not so much the KPIs or the sales targets, but yeah, the camaraderie. That's what I miss, and I've always worked well with a team, and I thrive working with different team members. But if I do look back 5 6 years ago, I'm glad that I made the decision of really putting up Filipino restaurant, and sort of putting ourselves out there to be discovered and to be appreciated by non-Filipinos. And what I love about what I'm doing now is that, not only because I've always considered myself as a foodie. Um, what I love doing now is that not only do I get to share my cultural sort of background in terms of the culinary space, but I get to promote more so my culture, my culinary culture, to people that have never come across, never heard of Filipino food. And just when people come in and try Filipino food for the very first time, and they take a bite out of, I mean, charcoal roast pork is, that term is not new. A lot of Americans, a lot of Europeans know what charcoal roast pork is. It's just in the Philippines we call it Cebu Lechon. So in our menu, what helps, of course, is to have that translation. Cebu Lechon is charcoal roast pork, and when I explain to them and show them photos, and once they bite into it, they always give me that expression, "Where have you been all this time?" Like, wow, it's like, we know charcoal roast pork. We've had it most of the times on weekends with family, but this is one crazy charcoal roast pork. Like, yeah, where has this flavor been all this time? Why have you been sort of hiding it? And whenever I hear that expression or that feedback, and I'm like, yep, yep, I'm where I'm meant to be. And it's awesome, and it's fabulous for me to be able to share my culinary heritage to those that have never come across Filipino cuisine.
Well, the Cebu Lechon is, the star dish and the foundation of the restaurant. But can you tell us about some of the other food that you have on the menu and what makes it so special?
Yeah, you're right. So Cebu Lechon is a star dish. It's the name of the meal itself, the Viand, and uh, also it's the name of a restaurant. So yeah, no pressure, right? Naming your restaurant. Naming your restaurant Meat Sydney Meat Pie. Obviously you got. But so yeah, we're very blessed that we're able to live up to that name, and even people that just arrived, that might just migrated from Cebu in the last how many years, and they miss Cebu and they come to our restaurant, they always say to us, "Wow, you've hit the mark." The only thing that's missing is like the beach and the sand outside of these windows. Um, but the other viands or the other dishes that we have to supplement or to back up our star dish, Cebu Lechon, are things like chicken humba. So chicken humba in English is braised soy chicken. We serve it in a clay pot. It's slow cooked. Again, full of aromatics. It's based with a lot of soy, slight vinegar, garlic. And the reason why I have that on our menu is that that's I suppose, out of love for my grandmother who introduced that recipe to my dad, who's passed it down to me. I suppose it's a recognition of her recipe. And so every dish that's on our menu, such as that, actually has a meaning. And we're probably the only or one of the few restaurants in Sydney that has such a short menu. Most restaurants that you walk into will probably have, easy over half a dozen menu, maybe even 20 or 30 items on the menu. But our restaurant only has, from memory, about 7 or 8 items on it. So it's very short, right? So people, yeah, it has its pros and cons. But for the most part, people do appreciate it because they always say to me, yeah, I can see why you're doing what you're doing, because you want to focus on getting each and every 7 or 8 dishes out consistently with punchy flavors. You know, I would rather have that than go into a place where there's like 20 different items to choose from, and you sort of scratch your head, out of these 20, where do I start? So that's the reason why we made it so short, is that we want to focus on something that we know we can do very well every day, every week of the year, and really not fail you. I mean, if you're going to have chicken humba a year ago and you come back 2 years later, the aroma, the flavor will still be the same. And we've got lechon kawale, which is the twice cooked deep fried pork belly. We have the crispy Bicol Express, which is the spicy coconut curry, uh, crispy pork belly. We have the skewers, which the barbecue pork skewers. We have a coating with our secret sauce, which is pretty addictive, the sauce itself and the meat. We have organic mixed vegetables, which we serve in clay pot. We've got the caramelized cured pork neck. So those are some of the dishes out of the 7 or the 8 that we have at the restaurant. But the signature dish, obviously, is the charcoal roast pork, the Sydney Cebu Lechon.
You're situated on Newtown's Enmore Road, which is a really thriving sort of hub of different sort of cuisines. Why did you choose that area and that site?
Oh, well, first of all, that site just happened organically. Well, I mean, what I mean is that um, back in 2000, was it 18 or 17 and 18, I was sort of envisioning I'm gonna have a Filipino eatery, but it's gonna be in an area where the Filipinos are a minority. So obviously, with that thought, it could have been anywhere. It could have been Marrickville. It could have been Darlinghurst. But when the place in Enmo popped up, basically, I looked at it, and then from looking at it, it sort of just fell into into place. So I was so happy that I didn't have to sort of break down doors to make things happen, because it just sort of fell into the place, and I couldn't have asked for a better place, because Enmo, such a eccentric, very unique, very welcoming community, a lot of ethnic, different sort of ethnic restaurants there, from from your Thai, Vietnamese, Japanese. So there's even Portuguese down the road, and a lot of Turkish restaurants. We're the only Filipino restaurant there, like literally the only Filipino restaurant. And but yet we have been embraced by the locals, and they've shown us a lot of love and support, especially, most especially, that was very visible during the pandemic, the start of the pandemic, or the lockdown, I should say, back in March. I think it was March or April last year, where obviously we couldn't accept diners, but people from the surrounding suburbs just ordered online, came and pick up their order. So yeah, that's when we saw, wow, like such a loving community. And yeah, I couldn't have asked for a better community to sort of be in. Yeah, we're very happy to be the only Filipino restaurant in that very beautiful community of Newtown on Enmore Road. Yeah.
I know the history of hospitality in your family is very rich, but you came from the corporate world a couple of years ago and started your own venue. What surprised you about running a restaurant?
Well, I mean, I'm quite different to most places, and I know there's some people out there that are in the same position as me, whereas we're we're self-funded. We don't have a line of credit with a bank. We don't have investors as such. Every dollar and cent, was pulled out of our own pocket from the savings that we put together, that I put together in my previous corporate salary. Um, and in saying that, that's also one of the reasons why we're not able to expand as most people are able to expand. They can open up different restaurants or different establishments within the year, within 2 years. But with us, it's a slow but surely progressive direction, positive progressive direction. And we um, I suppose, being that type of sort of setup, you do most things, like your administration, your accounting, and you can't always afford to hire a general manager, for example. So you do a lot of things yourself, such as social media, and I'm fine with that, because actually it's taught me a lot of experiences in terms of social media marketing, a lot of PR, for example, administration, which that wasn't really my strongest sort of skill set, because obviously in corporate there's different administration departments that will do a lot of admin work for you. But the transferable skills that I was able to sort of apply and grow my company, my restaurant, is things like your leadership and your sales, your sales skills, your networking skills. So those are the things that I was able to learn in my corporate years and apply it to my restaurant business. And I suppose I do more hours now as a restaurateur, as a chef, as a person who does it all, buying the grocery, uh, going to the organic farm and picking out the my snake beans and my okras and pumpkins and so forth. So But if I was, like the bigger restaurant groups, you've got all these people doing all these things for you, but I'm not at that stage yet. But I'm fine with that because I'm learning from the ground down, and I can sort of build it all the way up. So when I get to that stage, I can sort of look back and say, yeah, look, I know how to do that, and it teaches you a lot of things that you can sort of take on going forward. So yeah, no regrets. It's all a learning experience, which I'm embracing. And you sleep late at night because you want to make sure that before you turn the new leaf for the next day, you've got things covered as much as possible for the next day. But again, that's all part of growing and part of building something like a legacy. And my aim is not to so much build a name for myself per se. I mean, that's probably a byproduct, but my primary goal is to really create something for my heritage or for my culture, because I believe being underrepresented, there's still a lot of cultivating, a lot of groundwork, a lot of sowing that we need to do right now, to get Filipino cuisine, you know, on people's top of mind.
You mentioned that the opportunity to open your own restaurant came from your father looking to step away from the pans. Um, is there a role for your family with the current model that you have, and what do they think about the offering that you have?
Yeah, definitely. Look, my parents or my dad is still helping me sometimes. He's actually quite hands on. If I need like restaurant supplies, which I do on a weekly basis, uh, I'll just shoot him over a list, and then he'll source it for me, and he will drop it off at the restaurant. So he's very hands on like that. They're very supportive in terms of everything, like of the menu, and he gives me feedback, if he feels like, oh, that doesn't look the way I would do it. So he would be honest enough and sort of critique me. And that's the reason why I suppose the consistency has remained the same for what, 3 decades now. Because of that, he just doesn't sort of, I mean, I know he's retired, but he's not just sort of sitting in the background fading away. He's still pretty much involved, and he's very proud of the fact that the items on the menu sort of reminds him of the food that he cooks at home, and the food that his mum, my grandmother, used to cook for him. So I believe all in all, my dad still plays that supporting role. Both my mum and my dad still plays that supporting role, encouraging me and putting me aside if there's something that needs to be sort of tweaked before I could put it out there.
Educating and sharing knowledge about Filipino food and culture um, is quite a big project that you've set yourself, let alone running a restaurant. But so, can you tell us what's so great and amazing about Filipino food and culture that you think would draw people in that don't know a lot about it?
Well, Filipino cuisine is uh, is I definitely would say is a fusion of your Chinese, your Malay, Indian, Spanish influences, American influences, obviously because we've been firstly colonized by Spain, and then second colonization took place by the Americans, and the flavors that we put out on the plate is yeah, definitely fused in with all of those things. Like for example, with the chicken humba, it has a heavy influence of Chinese because the five spices, the early Chinese traders that came in and out of the Philippines during the spice trade, the soy that we use for the humba, for example, and dishes like, for example, the adobo, for example, that's also has a bit of a Spanish influence to it. At the same time, it has a rich indigenous ingredient such as coconut vinegar or cane vinegar that we add on there, which sort of somewhat, for lack of a better term, preserves the dish because obviously hundreds and hundreds of years ago, there was no fridge or refrigeration system. So having a vinegar sour based in our vine or in our dish would allow that to last, days on end without putting it in the refrigerator, for example. So, and it's quite exotic, and there is a bit of novelty also in the Filipino cuisine, such as, you know, the budol fight or the kamain, where you eat with your hands and you use the banana leaves as your plate. So it's very traditional, that sort of way of eating or dining experience. And a lot of things that we use at the restaurant, such as serving our chicken or vegetables in a clay pot, because again, cooking in clay pot in the Philippines or in Cebu, especially during when I was quite young, I saw that a lot, and everything was cooked out of firewood, and using a clay pot, which we use. The outdoor kitchen, which is what we call the dirty kitchen. It's basically just, you know, three big rocks sort of form as a triangle. Throw your wood fire underneath it, and you've got your clay pot simmering away, and that's all done outdoor cooking. And again, the whole experience, the fusion of flavors between Malay, Indian, with a bit of curry, because we have dish like kare kare, which is a peanut-based curry, um, and the Chinese fusion, the Spanish and the American influence. That's what makes our cuisine somewhat unique in a sense, while still using ingredients from the native Filipinos, the indigenous tribes. Yeah.
Well, it really is an amazing cuisine, and I'm glad that you're sharing it with Sydney, and I'd love to see more of it. Will, we've loved having you on Deep in the Weeds today to share your story. Please keep in touch, and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me here. And yeah, to those that haven't tried Filipino food, or specifically food from the island of Cebu, Philippines, come and give us a visit. We'll be more than happy to serve you, Huck, and your family, your friends, anyone.
Well, we'd love to be there. I'll hopefully see you soon.
Thank you very much, and we look forward to serving you very shortly.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we share the stories of Australia's hospo community, suppliers and producers in search of hope during this pandemic. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.